It is my favorite Kiss album. It's a lot of people's favorite Kiss albums, but it is a bit of a love it and hate it album. And interestingly, when it came out, there were some bad reviews. I think it's the one that people think has the most brains behind it.
We're totally booked.
Rock and roll!
Well, I think I'll leave you to your reading.
Little Hand says it's time to rock and roll.
Rock and roller!
We are totally booked.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Booked on Rock. This is the podcast for those about to read and rock. Martin Popoff is back on the podcast once again. This time he's got another excellent Kiss book. This is titled Kiss 76, 12 Months That Define the Hottest Band in the Land. Martin, how you doing?
Yeah, doing okay, Eric. Thanks for having me back.
Good to see you again, and absolutely love this book. This is such a cool idea, and I think we got to credit you because I've heard you on Three Sides of the Coin talking about this idea where you weave in politics and sports and cultural events throughout the months of that year. Why was that important for you to frame Kiss within that broader context?
Yeah, I think this was my idea. I think back to all the different concepts we've had at Quarto, like the at 50s, because they did a Kiss at 50 as well, and then the illustrated histories and the album by albums. And I can't remember, one or two of those was my idea and one or two of them wasn't. But this definitely, I'm pretty sure this was my idea. I recall once years ago just browsing the bookshelves and saw a book on one Led Zeppelin tour. And I thought that's probably the future of these rock books sort of thing. Right. And so this idea of, and then with Quarto, we've done, I went and did a whole book on the Who Quadrophenia and a whole book on Dark Side of the Moon. So I thought this whole snapshot in time idea is happening more often. And it's something that hasn't been done too much yet. So the idea here was, I loved just making this a love letter to 1976 more than anything. Thinking back to that time, a little bit, like you say, there's a lot of all the TV shows and films and things that happen in sports and plane crashes and political events and coups and whatever are in here, but. So that's good to have as you go along, because I think everybody who experienced Kiss in 76 had all these other things in their lives as well. TV was an appointment TV. You had to show up at that time or you weren't going to see it again. That's, we have all have these fond memories of going, watching Don Kirshner's rock concert or Midnight Special or the Kiss movie or the Alice Cooper movie kind of thing. And, but I also wanted to kind of make a point, just as a little bit of an aside. When I wrote this, I expected all three of those things to be equal month by month, like the world events, what's happening and world events includes pop culture, but then what else is happening in the music business, and then what's happening in Kiss's life. And when it got laid out, all that stuff was more like a ticker tape section, and the Kiss was highlighted, which is good because you get all the pictures that way. But writing them more so as equal partners. I think the main point I wanted to make is that even though we were all kind of Kiss centric, or like this book is Kiss centric, there are a lot of bigger bands and bigger albums that are happening in 1976 as well. So I wanted to make sure everybody had the full context. It wasn't all about Kiss that year, but if you lived through it and you bought Destroyer and Rock and Roll Over and maybe Originals, you were living all these other realities as well.
Yeah, I brought the book over to my brothers. He invited me over for Super Bowl Sunday. So I was showing it to my two older brothers. And there's just an emotional response as you flip through the pages. You're looking at, like you said, the bands, Blue Oyster Cult and the bands that were big at the time, but also the films that were big at the time. I think Rocky is in there, right? The Raiders, Ken Stabler, a photo of Ken Stabler, Bruce Jenner. That's what's so cool about this.
I'm looking at Idi Amin. I'm looking at the CN Tower, the Omen, Chuck Barris, the Gong Show.
Yes.
I love all the little ads. We got
Fonzie,
Muhammad Ali. I made sure. Yeah. Mary Tyler Moore, Bob Newhart show. These are all the shows we watched as kids.
That was a watershed year, 1976 for Kiss. And like you said, it places it month by month against the wider entertainment world. Now, how conscious was the band of competing not just with other rock acts, but with TV, movies, sports for public's attention? Because this is a very different band from any other band. Were they conscious of that?
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, they had great management. They were very ambitious. I don't think they were. It's more of a 2000s thing to start worrying about being, competing with the internet, video games, competing with the fact that we have streaming now, and at your fingertips you have everything, even for free. You've got it all on YouTube. So back then, I think they were probably not so much visionary about competing with Midway or Carrie or anything like that. But I think they were quite conscious with competing with Rush and Uriah Heep and Aerosmith and Ted Nugent and all these bands, Stars, Angel. There we've all heard the little, the rumors of being concerned about a backup band being better than them or whatever. And then, just being a band trying to stay ahead of their expenses, so to speak, they had this level of franticness or hysteria about their career, that whole strike while the iron is hot idea. But also they had this new sort of concept of being the most outrageous live show of all time that they were trying to do, at the time, which is, the precursor would be Alice Cooper. But they are carrying this thought in their head at the same time, which is, we're doing something new here. We may not, we will acknowledge we're not doing anything completely, crazily new when it comes to the music, but we are doing something new. Like when either if we're the support band or we have a band supporting us, they're dealing with a different animal when they run into Kiss because of the massiveness of the stage presence.
You mentioned Rush, you mentioned Blue Oyster Cult. Starting out the year, what other bands were Kiss effectively competing with, and how did they try to differentiate themselves in that crowded rock scene at the time?
Well, one point I wanted to make with this book is they're competing against bands that we as kids didn't even really think about that much as the competition. But just think about how much oxygen in the room was sucked out of the room by Peter Frampton Comes Alive, or Fleetwood Mac, or Eagles Hotel California. These are records that came out at the time. Or bands that were, I think we got Rolling Stones Black and Blue at the time, but Led Zeppelin didn't have an album. But none of that mattered, because the other news that's in this book here and there is that, oh, by the way, David Bowie's touring, Rolling Stones are touring America. They're playing stadiums, and Kiss isn't playing stadiums. They're still playing a combination of theaters and hockey barns, a kind of thing, right? So we have to remember they're competing against all that. But the direct competition, I remember growing up, and, what albums did we have at the time, sort of thing. Aerosmith was a bigger band than Kiss was at this time. They're about the same. I mean, Aerosmith's still on the ascendance, but Aerosmith is doing, rather well already with the 75 studio album, Toys in the Attic, and Dream On has come back, and now they have Rocks, which is considered the greatest Aerosmith album of all time. Ted Nugent, and all of a sudden he's big in 76 with Free for All, and even bigger the next year. And arguably in 77 to 78, Ted's selling more records than Kiss, but they're about the same size band, sort of thing. So, and there were all those up and comers, and they're all in the book as well. Angel, On Casablanca, Stars, managed by Bill Aucoin as well. Blue Oyster Cult is doing well this year with Agents of Fortune, with the big hit Don't Fear the Reaper. We've got Mahogany Rush, we've got Heart, we've got Rush. Of course, Rush is on the ascendance, and 76 is a huge year for them. I was just looking the other day. 2112 is now triple platinum.
Yeah.
That's a new thing. I think it was double platinum for a long time. So there was a lot of competition. And so a lot of these bands were doing about as well as Kiss. But one thing I kind of learned writing the book is that, although most of the bands I just mentioned got a lot of press, Kiss really was getting all sorts of column inches and press for the notoriety of how they looked in the stage show, and they were on the cover of a lot of these magazines, as were the other ones. Aerosmith got a lot of press at this time as well. But so yeah, this in a way, this is also a love letter to Circus Magazine and Cream and Hit Parader at the time too.
That leads to my next question, which is, did Kiss view themselves as part of the mainstream entertainment industry in 76, or were they still positioning themselves as outsiders that were challenging it? Because now they're on Cream. Now they're starting to get coverage, a lot of mainstream coverage.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I never really thought of that. I have a feeling if I know the personalities of those guys, they did not feel like outsiders at all. I think they felt like we were part of this whole thing. They're businessmen. They're from New York City. They're not. There's nothing particularly outsider about them, other than I'm sure they got their backs up a little bit as bad reviews would come in. And then, with reviewers dismissing them as a boy band or a novelty act, that would upset them. But I don't think they ever felt particularly like outsiders. They were playing with all those mainstream bands, and like you say, they were getting their fair share of press. We can't say they were slighted when it comes to the press at all. I'm sure in the early days, yeah. Come to think of it, I suppose, from Kiss through Hotter Than Hell, let's say, they probably felt that they were up against some pretty heavy odds, and they were probably frustrated that we weren't catching on as much as we should have.
This gives me a good perspective because, see, this is showing my age now. I was born in 72. I don't remember.
Yeah,
I wasn't following Kiss as they were happening. So for you, you're a little bit older. We're not going to go into the actual numbers here.
Yeah, 9 years older.
All right. So, but yeah, so you're old enough to remember. You followed it as it was happening. I wish I was old enough to remember and be able to recount, like, okay, I remember when Kiss became huge, So that's an interesting look at it, because I wondered, I know with the Live, all the articles you read, documentaries, is once that album blew up, then Kiss blows up. Prior to that,
yeah,
they have a good following, but not a huge following.
Well, and I'm proud to say I was there since the debut album as a new release. I mean, we saw that in the stores as kids and freaked out. Like, we thought, okay, this has a really good chance of being heavy, and it was, right? And but the funny thing about the sound of Kiss back then, it's an interesting band to try to compare them to, because it's kind of like stomping chordal hard rock. Rather than, the sophisticated bluesy hard rock of Aerosmith, or the riffier, Detroit-based hard rock of Ted Nugent, or anything British, which brought in classical or doom influences or virtuosity of a certain kind. So Kiss was more like, these days when we try to compare them to anything, all I can really think of, and none of this is satisfying to me, it's more like a sampling of Slade, heavy Bachman Turner Overdrive, and sweet singles. Chapman Chin kind of sweet singles. Your early ones like Blockbuster and Little Willie, and not so much Ballroom Blitz. What else? Hellraiser. Which have that heavy UK glam element of the stomping drums, maybe a little tribal pattern, maybe some hand claps mixed in on the snare, that kind of thing. And that's what Kiss sounded like kind of all through those first three albums, although I guess they got riffier through the second and the third, but still it felt like a different kind of music to most hard rock and heavy metal at the time.
Get every episode of Booked on Rock commercial free by grabbing a Backstage Pass on Patreon. It's just $5 a month and a great way to support the show. Check the show notes for the link or visit bookedonrock.com to sign up. Looking month by month, was there a point where Kiss clearly pulled ahead of their competition in terms of cultural visibility and impact?
Interesting question, because I suppose it happened immediately, because Alive comes out September of 75. And it explodes pretty much right away. So you got 3 months of growth there, 2 months of growth. And they're touring Alive, and they're essentially still touring Alive. I love that concept of touring a live album. It's a funny idea. but they are kind of doing that, working super hard. And then even when Destroyer comes out in March of 76, they're still kind of touring alive. And then there's all that weirdness of, what costumes are we wearing and how many new songs are into the set and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, so November, they have Rock and Roll Over. In the middle, they have the originals. So there's a lot of stuff happening all along the way, but they're just kind of on like they did in the 70s. They're just kind of on a continuous tour. People don't even really, it doesn't even really register in their heads like, oh, the album's out today, by the way, as we play Kalamazoo, right? It's like, and when did they record the album? Well, they took 2 weeks off or 3 weeks off, and they went on this break, and they probably even had gigs in between recording sessions and stuff like that. That's how these 70s bands operated. So they were essentially famous every single month of 1976.
Yeah, you talk about the originals released by Casablanca. That was July of 76, and it re-released the first 3 albums. What role did marketing and branding play in Kiss becoming a phenomenon in 76? And how did it differ from the other bands?
Oh, it's a big deal. They were super into the merchandising right away. I mean, part of this book, one of the things it celebrates is those classic shoots with the crazy custom cars and Gene over in California, I believe that was. But the on top of the Eiffel Tower, the infamous snow shoot for winter, the bicentennial shoot with Peter with the marching drum and the the flag, and then going to London and being shot in front of Big Ben and stuff like that. So those are all iconic, and we started to get Kiss posters. So yeah, merchandising was a huge deal. The originals, I remember when that came out, we all bought it. Because it's just like, hey, so slightly different. The album cover's in a little piece of paper this time, and there's a few little doodads and extras in it. Oh, you got to have this. It's a new Kiss album. We all had the first 3 albums, but it still felt like an event if you were a kid back then when the originals came out, and it made the band seem important, right?
It had the Kiss Army sticker, right? It had the trading cards. I mean, that was stuff that other bands they were not doing, were they?
Yeah, exactly. And even Alive had extra stuff in it. And, the Kiss Army, the original form was in with Destroyer. The other thing is, so that made them feel like an important big deal band. But the other thing that made them feel like a huge deal was the way that when you saw the ads for these albums, there was not a lot of hype text at all. It would just say, is coming, the new album's coming, September, whatever. So they had this kind of really conservative corporate staid version of an ad they would do. Just picture the album cover on a black background with a little bit of text saying a little bit of something, but not going, oh my God, the greatest album of all time. Wait till you hear the stump and single, blah, blah. None of that stuff was in these ads. So that always felt really cool. It's like some big massive company in downtown New York is writing this dumb ad, and they all look the same, and so yeah, they seemed larger than life, like right out of the gate kind of thing.
Martin Popoff, the author of Kiss 76, 12 months that defined the hottest band in the land. Let's get to Ezra now. March of 76, Kiss released Destroyer. You write that Kiss came into the sessions with a large batch of songs. Ezra rejected most of them. The result is a batch of songs created under his vision. Could Destroyer have become such a landmark record without Ezra's heavy-handed guidance?
I don't think so. I mean, it is my favorite Kiss album. It's a lot of people's favorite Kiss albums, but it is a bit of a love it and hate it album. And interestingly, when it came out, there were some bad reviews, and to the point where Kiss fired Ezra off of the next album, blamed him for this crappy album, quote unquote. But of course, now it is the most celebrated Kiss album. I think it's the one that people think has the most brains behind it. It's got the most dynamic range, all the way from, the super quietness of Beth with no drums whatsoever to some of their heaviest songs. Certainly, probably most of their heaviest songs yet in God of Thunder, Detroit Rock City, King of the Nighttime World, mainly. And the heaviness was advanced by this slightly wider, more exciting range, even to the heavy end of things. But it had a lot of ear candy on it as well. Critics still they didn't particularly like it, but now they weren't calling Kiss a boy band, they were calling them pretentious, as if like this is almost too smart in a way, but it was like fake smart. So that happened. But as we know, and then the deep angry headbanger fans revolted big time against Great Expectations, and Beth hated them, as I did. But I realized, Detroit Rock City is clearly the most sophisticated, cool new song that they ever did, and just the production in general is really good. Kiss had kind of an odd 70s glam production. Hotter Than Hell had that turgid, obscure sound, muddy, and then people think Dressed to Kill is a little bit too clean and neat and polite, and then people think Alive sounds great, but this sounded like properly dynamically great, like just good highs and good lows. It was just a good sounding record. And yeah, a lot of this came down to Bob Ezrin. He did a lot of this kind of thing with Alice Cooper. Not the greatest sounding albums, the Alice Cooper albums, but the first really good sounding Alice Cooper album to my ears is Welcome to My Nightmare. And Destroyer to me feels almost like Welcome to My Nightmare Part 2. There's just so much about it that you can compare. And I believe how did that, some podcast, maybe one of my own podcast episodes or our video channel Contrarians, I did a whole comparison between the two, and they just seem really, really, really alike.
Oh, I got to check that out. Yeah. Well, this is probably a good time to ask you about Kim Fowley. He's among the exclusive interviews for this book. Talk about his contributions to the story of Kiss in 1976.
Yeah, he was a crazy guy. He seemed a little bit mentally ill. I interviewed him, and he's a very boastful guy as well. Wanted to make sure his legacy was in kind of on it. So there's just the elliptical "Do You Love Me" story, co-write Kim Fowley and stuff. He's not a big part of this whole thing, and he's part of the Runaways, of course, as well as a manager of that band. And then Venus and the Razor Blade. So he's got his hands in a few things here and there, more as a co-writer or almost like shilling this song and trying to get it over into the band. So yeah, he's just one of these strange guys along the way. Kiss has an interesting history. So if you go through the credits all throughout, there's all like, who was that guy? Who's that guy they co-wrote? Who's Stan Penridge? What's Vinnie Poncia? What's he all about? Where are all these people? Or Sean Delaney? What is that? And so it's he's just another one of these characters along the way.
Oh, who's the guitarist that was with Alice that was on some of the Kiss records?
Dick Wagner.
Now. Yeah, Dick Wagner.
Yeah, Dick Wagner's somewhere in here. So Bob Ezrin has this good thing about him is like he will crack the whip. If you're not doing well, he will just say, "I'm going to replace you," and he'll threaten you with that. And so he made all these guys work hard. And I think everybody in the band appreciated it after the fact, but during. It was more like the guys with their heads screwed on straight, i.e. Gene and Paul, realized this is good for us. And Ace and Peter were more the complainers, thinking, this is too much work. We'd rather drink and do drugs kind of thing and not work this hard, and let's be a little more spontaneous. But after the fact, everybody kind of spoke well of the experience. Yeah, we kind of needed that. We kind of needed to be whipped into shape a little bit.
I think Rock and Roll Over would be the last album that was recorded by all four of the members, because from that point moving forward, more and more you have like ghost musicians that are in the studio for Dynasty, and Unmasked was Anton Fig on drums.
Which makes me think, this book there seems to be a fair bit of excitement around it. I mean, I'm semi talking to Cordo about, hey, do you want to do Kiss 77? I don't know if I want to do Kiss 77, but
that'd be cool.
It's interesting. I mean, there is Love Gun, there is Alive 2 with a whole studio side, which I love. I think that's a great studio side they put together there. So yeah, it's interesting. It might be an idea, but yeah, Rock and Roll Over, whole different thing. People love that album as well. I'm not a massive fan of it. But that was them famously. No, we're not going to work with Bob Ezrin. We're going to work with Eddie Kramer, who had a long, interesting history, as well as working on Alive, which is, that's such a corrupty businessy sort of thing to say. It's like, oh, let's hire the producer that made our live album, quote unquote, right? So it's weird, eh? But still, I mean, they have good memories, of course, of him doing well there and getting along with them and stuff. And then he did a great job on Rock and Roll Over. It's a very rudimentary workman-like production job, but people love it. People love the sounds that they got on there, even though they are kind of lacking in dynamic range and kind of mid-rangey. There's something about the vibrancy of a trashy mid-rangey mix that gives you those positive attributes that people talk about, and so people really do like the songs on there, and they quite like the production as well.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of Kiss fans say it's their favorite. The album cover by Michael Dorette, I think that's the pronunciation of the last name. He did the art on Rock and Roll Over. Before we talk about that, we should talk about Ken Kelly, though, because his cover of Destroyer. So both of those album covers are iconic. And Ken Kelly's, how important was that artwork in shaping Kiss's mythic superhero-like identity, particularly against the album covers from the other bands that year?
Yeah, super important. People loved that cover, immediately. And what a great title, too, Destroyer. What a killer title. So,
I had the Jigsaw Puzzle, the Destroyer album cover
cool.
Jigsaw Puzzle.
I don't think I ever had that. But he also did Rainbow Rising, which came out the same year. And later on, he did Manowar. He did Love Gun as well. But no, that's a great, great album cover. And it was just so super reproduced on everything. People loved it. Great, great pictures of the band in that. Later on, we got to see the alternate versions, which are kind of the same, but just cool as well. But yeah, it looked cool, kind of floating above that rubble, and then on the back, it was classy because it was just sort of a continuation of the scene with nothing much in it, just some smoking ruins kind of thing. So yeah, it was really, really cool that way. I mean, it's all of the album covers were cool. I mean, especially Alive. The debut was cool, Hotter Than Hell. So they had great album covers. But yeah, against it really showed you what this band was about. The other interesting thing about that album cover, subconsciously as kids, we always felt this, and I still feel this to this day, that when you illustrate a band, it makes them seem more important than when you photograph a band. So it's like, oh, somebody's doing our painting, so that's kind of cool. That's kind of cool as well. But yeah, it made the band look, like you say, larger than life.
Yeah, and Rock and Roll Over is more like a comic book type of energy to it.
Yeah, and I remember getting that and feeling a little bit disappointed in the idea. It still looked great, and it blew our minds that, oh my God, a new Kiss album. But you were starting to feel that, am I outgrowing this band a little? Is this a little too goofy looking? It certainly doesn't look as manly as Destroyer did. It did feel like, so in 77, I'm like 14, and now I'm thinking, is this a band for 12-year-olds? And I'm getting more and more and more great albums all the time at that time. Rainbow's out. We've got Judas Priest in our lives now. I mean, Sad Wings of Destiny in 1976. I mean, craps on both of these albums from a height of several miles.
Okay.
It's that when we heard Sad Wings, it was just like a masterpiece. This is like our favorite band of all time now. How come this band is so genius, right? You had AC/DC coming out, but it was more like Sad Wings. It still felt like certainly Sad Wings by a large margin, but even Rainbow Rising, and even, 2 or 3 UFO albums in our life at this point. Deep Purple's got a whole slew of good albums by this point, and they're actually broken up. Deep Purple is gone by 76. So yeah, it did feel, I remember going through all these years. Kiss was never my favorite band. I mean, they were probably close in 74, 75, but by 76, there's no way they were the favorite band. They almost seemed like the closest to us. But at that point, having all those Black Sabbath records and like I say, Sad Wings, and then soon as you get to the new wave of British heavy metal and on, and we had Derringer and Stars and Moxie and Riot and Tease and more Rush albums. Kiss had a lot of competition. And as as they are staying kind of in that young teen zone, we're becoming in our older teens, and we're listening to bands that seemed a little more grown up too.
Hey guys, we'll get back to the show, but first I want to tell you about an exclusive deal for Booked on Rock listeners. Get 15% off any purchase at oldglory.com. Over 300,000 officially licensed items covering music, sports, entertainment, and pop culture. Merchandise featuring legendary music artists like Bob Marley, The Beatles, Grateful Dead, Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin, and many, many more. Go to oldglory.com. Make sure to use the promo code BookedOnRock. Also find a link in this episode's show notes, or just go to bookedonrock.com and click on My Deals. Obviously, one of the most, maybe the most photogenic bands in rock. How much did that help them up against those bands and those albums that you say, like the Priest album, better than the two that Kiss put out that year, yet Kiss more visible, right? They were the most photogenic band.
Oh, for sure.
I mean,
and
how did that contribute to their explosion?
Well, they made great magazine covers. So magazines loved putting Kiss on the cover. And I remember in later years, I don't know if this was the case early on. It'd be an interesting question. But I remember in later years when we had our own magazine, Kiss would only interview with you if you put them on the cover. It was kind of this neat sort of management thing they had. It's like, oh, yeah, you can interview Kiss. They have to go on the cover. You gotta promise me they go on the cover. It's kind of neat. So they made great covers. They made great posters. They made great merch. They made great Halloween costumes. You couldn't go out as Brad Whitford on Halloween. It's but everybody went out as their favorite Kiss characters, right?
Right.
So yeah, it was a great competitive advantage. Everybody knew they were going to get a great show with Gene spitting blood and flames all over the place, and and we used to our favorite hockey team was the Philadelphia Flyers, the Broad Street Bullies, because they were always in fights. Our favorite football team was the Oakland Raiders. We called them we called Kiss. Which direction does this go? We either called Kiss the Oakland Raiders on acid, or we called the Oakland Raiders
Yes.
Kiss on acid. But to us, they were the Kiss of the NFL because they wore the exact same color costumes, right? And they had Kenny Stabler, badass Kenny Stabler, with his long hair and stuff. We loved that, right? And so yeah, they were just they were kind of the coolest band if they weren't the greatest when it came to the actual music.
Speaking of Halloween, their appearance on Paul Lynde's Halloween special, October of '76, it's a pivotal moment in their career. It's one of the strangest things you'll ever see. Manager Bill O'Coin actually was skeptical about putting Kiss on TV. In hindsight, why do you see this appearance as one of Kiss's key media breakthroughs in 1976?
Yeah, that was great because Paul Lynde is everybody loved Paul Lynde. He's a great comedian. He was great in that show. And then you had the Wizard of Oz connection in there as well with Margaret Hamilton, and Kiss looked amazing, and they were kind of part of skits, and they did pretty good with that too. And then they played. But again, it's this idea of back then you had to show up. There were not even really video recorders yet. Video recorders were still a couple years away. So you had to be there, and if you missed it, you miss it. There may be a second showing or a rerun, but probably not. It's a one-time thing. It's like you had to go to the concert. I grew up in a small town, so we didn't have the going to the concerts thing. But you had to see that, because you couldn't go to school the next day and be the only guy who missed it, and then everybody's talking about it at school the next day. So that was always important. And the Midnight Special. Oh, who got to stay up to see Midnight Special, or who had the dedication to go to bed and then wake up again at midnight to watch Midnight Special, right? And that proved you were dedicated with the music. So anytime these things all happened too, it was super important. Like I say, just like the Welcome to My Nightmare movie earlier.
And you round that out with relentless touring.
Yeah, and they would play everywhere, and sometimes they got big crowds, sometimes not. But they had such a great touring ethic to put themselves in front of everybody. They weren't scared to do this as a support band or the headliner. That just it's part of the whole. They did play everywhere, but they had that ethic that they knew that whole thing about, Aerosmith's Blue Jean Army or the Rust Belt. Middle America is where you make your bones as a band. Rush did it, Aerosmith did it. So all those Clevelands and Chicagos and St. Louis's, that was the bread and butter sort of feeling. And they probably had their backs up a little bit of being one of these bands that was too stupid for the coasts, kind of thing, right? Where the fans would be a little more skeptical and they'd be crossing their arms watching you. Okay, just sell us on what you do, sort of thing. Whereas it was a band for the kids. It was a band for the kids, between the coasts.
So after immersing yourself in this era, what do you think the lasting legacy of Kiss in 1976 is?
Well, I think the thing I learned the most and can appreciate the most, and it's a fascinating topic because I've thought about this, like, say, comparing Judas Priest versus the Pretenders in 1982. And I always think, is Judas Priest the bigger business than the Pretenders because of the trappings of the stage show? And do they sell more tickets than the Pretenders, even though they both have a platinum album? Like, it's a fascinating concept, thinking, are the Pretenders playing the same size venues as Priest or no? And so, without answering that question, maybe you know the answer because you're smarter than me on all this stuff.
I don't know about
Going
that.
back to 76, what I appreciated about this is that I get the feeling, or in my gut, I feel like even though there are bands selling more records than Kiss is selling as many tickets, if not more, than those bands. And there's more excitement around them, and they're getting more press. Guess the press is all more exciting. So it's almost like, Kiss famously, they've got this strange gold and platinum history where they have not too many huge selling albums, but everything went gold, kind of thing. So they've got this, it's kind of like Rush a little bit. But Rush is starting to pull away. Like, I think Moving Pictures is now 5 times platinum. So they're pulling away a little bit, but otherwise, whole ton of gold records, right? And platinum, single platinum records. So Kiss, I think, is rolling through this year as a big band, but not particularly selling a lot of records. But they are as big as anybody else, and there's as much buzz about them as anybody else. But still, when Led Zeppelin rolls through town, they're playing a football stadium.
Oh yeah,
kind of thing. Yeah.
Well, I think an interesting Kiss book would be the fact that the audiences got younger led to the downfall of Kiss, but then I don't think they would have the comeback that they had in the 90s without that audience who is now, that would have been 20 years later, because they came back in 96. So 15 to 20 years later, those kids are now in their 20s and 30s. And so they're going back and seeing the band. I don't know if there's something to that, or I don't know if you're following what I'm going with, because, they're older. And it's a nostalgia thing for them. It's bringing them back to their childhood. I was right in that strike zone. I was 7 years old in 1979.
Yeah, definitely. So, there's a couple things there. Number one, the downfall of the band is a little bit, I think, because, they lightened up a little. That's for sure. But also, I think they just kind of got locked into their audience. Never particularly, they never matured and brought along a maturing audience with them. They stayed in that we're the perfect band for 12 and 13-year-olds thing. So that's the first thing that happened. I always find it fascinating how they were probably the most hair metal band of the entire hair metal decade, and yet they're this old band from the 70s. Nobody was more prolific and looked more hair metal than Kiss all through the 80s. Even if you were a baby hair metal band, Kiss was literally the ultimate hair metal band through the 80s, which is pretty fascinating to me.
Especially Paul in the videos.
Well, all of them, the way they dressed. They all dressed fully, like they all looked like Whitesnake at their worst, or the David Lee Roth band. They were so hair metal all through that time, and all the lyrics and all the album covers, and their they are on the spot for the very first year of hair metal, 1983. And they got an album in 84. They got an album in 85. Do they have an album in 86? I don't think so.
87 was Crazy Nights.
80, 88 and
88 is,
89.
I think 88 is Smashes, Thrashes, and Hits.
87 would be Crazy Nights then. So Smashes, Thrashes, and Hits, which I think is double platinum. Then they have a 90 album. Then they even have Revenge.
Hot in the Shade, 89.
Yeah. Hot in the Shade is 89. Okay,
Yep.
so I thought it was 90. So 92 for Revenge. So they are operating full bore right through that whole thing. They probably are the only band. They are probably the only band that is a hair metal band that is operating full bore. Well, no, I suppose. I mean, does Rat operate full bore they start in 84 with their full length, but really they are there for the entire run. And whereas, your Police and Cinderellas and Warrants aren't there for the entire run.
Thanks so much for checking out the Booked on Rock podcast. If you've just found the podcast, welcome. If you've been listening, thank you so much for your support. And make sure you tell a friend, a family member, share on social media, and let people know about Booked on Rock. And if you do like the podcast, make sure you subscribe, give a 5-star review wherever you listen to the Booked on Rock podcast. We're on Amazon, Apple, iHeart, Spotify, Spreaker, TuneIn, and on YouTube Music. You can check out the full episodes on video, along with video highlights from episodes on the Booked on Rock YouTube channel. Find it at Booked on Rock. Thanks again for listening. Now back to the show. Kiss is my second favorite band behind Van Halen. So I want to thank you for this great book and the folks at Motor Books, Steve Roth as well, for hooking me up with this copy. On the back it says, the greatest year in the career of rock's most dynamic band. There you go. Now this book is out on February 24th. Kiss 76, 12 months that define the hottest band in the land. I'm assuming people can pre-order it now.
Well, actually, I'm on my third batch of them. I've been sending them out for a few weeks now. So I have them. You can get them at martinpopoff.com. I sign them, send them out from the office here. I'll sign them to whoever you want. There's PayPal buttons there, easy to do. And also, I've got about 35 of my 135 titles for sale there. I cut down a little when it came to the tariff thing. It's a long story. It's just a little more complicated to do business. But I've got also through Schiffer Books, I've got my big fat right above my head here, the big Deep Purple, the big Iron Maiden, the big Dio. And then a bunch of updates came out lately. And I think I still am. I think I still am selling Kiss at 50 as well, which is not that long ago. I think that's only a year or two old. All
right. Well, Martin, thanks, man. This is great, as always. And we will look forward to having you back on again. But folks could go to your website to get copies of Kiss 76, signed copies as well. All right. Cool. Thanks, Martin.
Wicked. Thanks for having me, man.
That's it. It's in the books.